Welcome to Philosophy 480, the history of analytic philosophy. This first video will be nothing but housekeeping. I remember when I was a student, one of the things that I didn't like about the first day of class was we always spent a lot of time on housekeeping things. And if I was interested in the class, that's not what I wanted to hear about. Unfortunately, it's something that has to be done. So that's what we're going to do in this quick, short video to start the semester. So this is Phil 480, History of Analytic Philosophy. My name is John Quanvig. Let me say that again because it's kind of an unusual last name. It's Quan, as in Q-U-A-N, Vig, V-I-G, Quanvig. It's Norwegian. It's kind of weird. In any case, my office is in Wilson 206. There's a phone number on the syllabus. To my phone in that office, I doubt we're going to get a chance to use that office this semester. It seems like everything is going to be done remotely, and probably you won't be on campus either. In any case, that's where my office is. Maybe we'll get a chance to meet some other time in that office before you graduate. For this course, I'm going to hold office hours during class time. Class time is technically 10 to 11:30 Monday and Wednesday. I now see that I have two different offices listed on the syllabus. Up here I say I'm in Wilson 104. I used to be there. I'm really in Wilson 102, but as I said earlier, we probably won't have a chance to use the physical locations anyway. Since the class meets Monday and Wednesday 10 to 11:30, I'm going to hold office hours during the scheduled class time. If it turns out that doesn't work for you because you've got other classes at the same time, I understand. Since this is an asynchronous class, I think you were probably, students were in general allowed to register for overlapping classes. In any case, we'll set up something else for office hours. The way office hours works is you register through Zoom for the date that you plan to show up. You have to do it in advance, and then it sends you a link by email so that you can join this Zoom session. This is probably going to be the cheapest class in terms of textbooks that you'll ever take because there is no textbook. There are online links for each of the readings we'll do for the semester. If you find that any of the links are broken, this happens occasionally because sometimes things were available at a certain site and then cease to be. I have checked all of the links prior to the semester starting. So I know they worked before the semester started, but that doesn't mean anything. Once we get to them, they may be broken, and I'll have to find some other online source. You can also do that yourself. You're probably much better at this than I am anyway. Here's the course description. I don't think this was printed to this extent in the course catalog or in the registration materials. So let me read it to you. This course will begin with the reaction of G.E. Moore to the dominant idealism of the 19th century, together with the advances in formal approaches launched by Gottlob Frege. There's a chance for you to figure out what kind of name you want to give your future boys. Gottlob, not a real popular name. In any case, formal approaches launched by Gottlob Frege. I think I'll just call him Frege. Gottlob is kind of strange. And Bertrand Russell. I hope Bertrand Russell's name is familiar to you. Maybe Frege's is as well. Russell was famous in Great Britain. First, he was a pacifist. He won maybe a Nobel Peace Prize, I'm not sure. Very famous philosopher. He was British royalty. He did lots of work in formal philosophy up through the beginning of World War I. And after World War I broke out, first, he said he didn't think he had the capacity to do formal work anymore. But he also said the World War, First World War and then the Second World War, were such monumental things that it seemed focusing on purely formal material was irrelevant anymore. It was too abstract, too divorced from the important issues of the day. So he turned his interests to other aspects of philosophy. He worked in metaphysics and epistemology, and he also wrote some books on social and political thought. And being a pacifist made him extremely unpopular in England, especially during World War II. World War I was less a clear-cut case, but for World War II, it's hard to see how pacifism could stand up against the atrocities that were being committed. I'm not saying it's impossible, I'm just saying it's much harder. If there were ever a just cause, it looked like Nazism was a thing to be resisted by war efforts if nothing else would work against it. In any case, he was a pacifist through and through, ended up spending time in prison because of his pacifism, ended up losing his job at Cambridge because of it. He had a professorship there that was taken away. He came to the United States, tried to go to Wayne State in Detroit, but his work in the history of philosophy made him unpopular with some of the faculty. If you look at the big fat book that is the translation of the basic works of Aristotle, the author, the translator who put together that volume, taught at Wayne State, and one of Russell's most notorious books is A History of Western Philosophy that historians standardly deride as not being any good at all. It's completely biased in favor of Russell's own philosophical interests. So as a work in the history of philosophy, it's not very impressive. It cost him his job, cost him a job offer at Wayne State. He also had libertine sexual ethics that cost him positions in other possible locations. But in any case, Russell is certainly the best known philosopher of the 20th century outside of philosophical circles. Inside of philosophical circles, maybe Wittgenstein is as famous as Russell, but Russell was a public figure in a way that Wittgenstein never was. So in any case, we're going to look at More, Frege, and Russell, and to a lesser extent, Wittgenstein prior to the end of World War I. There's a real natural break in the history of analytic philosophy right around 1920. So prior to 1920, we get More, Russell, Wittgenstein, and Frege. And after 1920, it turns in a different direction, beginning with the Vienna Circle and the rise and fall of logical positivism or empiricism. So it will engage in the rise of ordinary language philosophy through the later work of Ludwig Wittgenstein, as well as the important influence of the Vienna Circle and the rise and fall of logical positivism, empiricism, culminating in the resurgence of metaphysics with the work of Saul Kripke. Saul Kripke's influence occurs in the late 1960s, so by the time we get to 1970, my view of the history of analytic philosophy is we are in a post-analytic period by that point. There is no surviving version of analytic philosophy. There is instead philosophy done in the analytic tradition, but it is not analytic philosophy. When analytic philosophy dies, that's controversial. Some people have said it died as early as 1930. My own view is it's on life support by the time you get to the 1950s. It comes under epistemological attack in the 1950s, which we will look at. The important figures there are going to be Chisholm, Quine, Goodman, and Sellers. And then it comes under attack from metaphysical and logical sources. For that, we're going to look at Ruth Barkin Marcus and Saul Kripke especially. So after we finish with the work of Kripke, the course will include a look at philosophy that's still in the analytic tradition, even though, as I understand it, it doesn't count as analytic philosophy itself. And we'll see why it doesn't count as analytic philosophy later on. So let's look at the course outline to show you what we are going to do. What I want you to see is the final draft of a first paper and the first draft of a first paper occur in weeks 6 and 8. So by the time we get to week 6, as I said, the primary figures are going to be More, Russell, Frege, and to a lesser extent, Wittgenstein, who was a student of Russell primarily, but also of G.E. Moore. We'll talk more about the particular details of that. But by the time we get to week 6, we'll have finished the first part of the history of analytic philosophy. We will then start with the second part while you're working on your first paper. And we will do the stuff about the Vienna Circle first and a little bit about ordinary language philosophy prior to you turning in the final draft of your first paper. Then after your first paper is turned in, we will start to look at how things fall apart. So here are the great epistemologists and their attacks on logical empiricism. Here are the logical and metaphysical attacks on logical empiricism. And you'll see that by the time we get to that, you'll then have a first draft of the second paper due. Your final draft of the second paper will be due by the last day of the semester. And in between, what we will do is look at post-positivist, post-logical empiricist directions. That's what I count as post-analytic philosophy. Philosophy done in the analytic tradition, but which is not itself to be counted as analytic philosophy. You will hear many people, by the way, describe a current divide in philosophy as a divide between continental and analytic philosophy. As I understand things, that's simply a mistake. There is no such thing as analytic philosophy that occurs anymore. A charitable reading of what people are talking about is that there is a kind of philosophy done, or which used to be done primarily in continental Europe, that derives from 19th century absolute idealism in the German tradition of Hegel and runs through Heidegger and maybe includes Husserl. That's one kind of philosophy. The other kind is philosophy done in the analytic tradition, which takes as its great mentor heroes people like Frege, Russell, G.E. Moore, Wittgenstein, that sort of thing. So that's the sort of history that we're looking at. Let me see if I can get rid of all these red marks. Now let's go to the details of what we are going to be doing. As you've already seen, there will be 2 papers for the course. Each paper comprises turning in a first draft and a final draft, and in between time, commenting to other students on their drafts, and also revising your paper in light of the comments of your fellow students and what I give you myself. Since there are a reasonably small number of students in this class, I guess it should be there is a reasonably small number of students in this class, each of us will comment on everybody else's paper. So if you turn your paper in on a given Friday, by the next Friday, you will get comments to every other student on their papers. That means by 1 week after you turn in your rough draft, you will get comments from everybody else in the class, including me, and then you use the second week to revise your paper. The point of doing things in this way is that I have a father-in-law whose motto as a university professor was, "There's no such thing as good writing. There's only good rewriting." I like that motto. It's not actually true, but that's the way mottos work. There is such a thing as good writing. Some people are incredibly gifted at first drafts. I think I know maybe 2 or 3 people like that. They're crazy good at writing first drafts. Most of the rest of us have to work a bit harder at it. So we should not presume that we're one of the truly gifted and blessed in this regard, so we will do rewriting for this class. The important thing about the first draft is turning in your first draft on time. Because if you don't turn in your draft on time, all hell breaks loose for your progress in the course. You won't get credit for your draft. You won't receive credit for comments on other students' papers. You'll get a grade of 0 for that portion of the grade. Comments are due by the following Friday. So the worst possible thing to do is fail to turn in a first draft on time. Just don't do that. Everything will be good for you, much better for you if you turn in your draft on time. Then for the final draft, you turn in your final draft paper, but you also turn in a list of all the students who provided comments together with an explanation of the changes you made in light of the comments. And you also evaluate the quality of the comments. So if you got a set of comments that said nothing of any particular value and didn't seem to have really engaged with trying to help you write a better paper, you should just say that. In addition to the papers, the other thing that affects your grade is the readings journal. So let's look at the grade section to see how the breakdown occurs. So the papers are each worth 70% of the total grade, which means the remainder is the discussion journal and class participation, 30%. So how does the readings journal work? Students will be required to keep a journal for the course. For every article assigned, the journal assignment is due by Friday at 5 p.m. of the week in which the article is assigned. The journal entry summarizes the readings, focuses on the issues, controversies, and arguments in the reading, and gives some sort of assessment of the significance of what you've read to your understanding of the issues that the course is talking about. Each entry should be no more than 1 to 2 pages in length, and the way you enter them is you go to Canvas for the course, look for the discussion section, and in the discussion section, when you click on that tab, I will create something called journal or journal entries. That's where you enter your discussions. You can enter them either as Word documents or PDFs. I don't care how you enter them. The important thing is to make sure you enter them by 5 p.m. on Friday. The grading for them is pass-fail, and the grade you get is just a percentage of those that pass that were submitted on time. So you automatically fail if they turn out to be entered late. So don't be late. In addition to the course outline and the material that I already went over, I've also put at the end of the syllabus the course notes that we'll be using for the course. So we're going to begin with the idealist background. Idealism was an incredibly popular metaphysical view in the 19th century, both in Germany and in Great Britain. In Great Britain, the most illustrious idealist was F.H. Bradley, who turned out to be the dissertation director for G.E. Moore. And the start of analytic philosophy, as I understand it, is in Moore's reaction to the idealism of his teacher, F.H. Bradley. So you can see the very first thing we're going to read, one of the very first things, is Moore's paper called Refutation of Idealism. It turns out that's a misleading title. He's not actually going to refute idealism. That would be to demonstrate that idealism is false. He doesn't actually do that. What he does is he undermines what he takes to be the standard way of defending idealism and says it rests on a confusion. So we're going to look at 3 of Moore's most famous papers: Refutation of Idealism, Proof of an External World, A Defense of Common Sense. And the videos for the course will go through this material. In any case, I put a list of the course notes at the end of the syllabus so that you can go to the syllabus and find the course notes that will form the content, the material that will be on the screen when I talk through the course material. So Moore's Refutation of Idealism is from, I believe, 1891. I'll check on the date and make sure I get that accurate. So we're talking late 19th century for the start of analytic philosophy. If you want to date it around 1890, I think that's reasonable. It turns out after we do G.E. Moore's material, we're going to drop back in history a bit to Frege, because Frege forms the background for Russell's work later on. Moore convinced Russell to give up idealism in favor of realism, and in the process, Russell was reading this German mathematician, Frege. Frege was not in a philosophy department. He was working on the foundations of mathematics and created a new logic. And Russell was looking at that and thinking about logic at the same time, because Russell thought if we paid attention to the logical form of sentences, we would keep from making lots of mistakes that we were making. So Russell was primarily interested in formal material early on in his career, but he became a realist through Moore's influence. So Moore and Russell were colleagues at the University of Cambridge. They were contemporaries with John Maynard Keynes and other famous people at Cambridge at the same time, and Wittgenstein joined them later at Cambridge as well. So you had a bunch of philosophers, and you had economists and psychologists and physicists, lots of people. And Cambridge was the heart of British higher education up through, I guess, about the Second World War. And then Oxford became a better place to be doing philosophy than Cambridge since World War II. In any case, we're talking about the Cambridge period early on. So by the time we get to this part, the dividing line, we'll look at the later Wittgenstein and some material that comes after it. But this is where, in the course notes, the divide in the history of analytic philosophy occurs. There's the early period, which is roughly Frege, More, and Russell, and the later period, which is the Vienna Circle and the collapse of the ideals embodied in the work of the Vienna Circle. So that's what the course is going to be about and how it will be divided. I think that's enough for this introductory video covering housekeeping, and we'll pick up with the idealist tradition in the next video.